Warning. Listening to this show may result in increased levels of inspiration, motivation, and innovation. Side effects can include the immediate urge to take massive action to build a better business and life for yourself and others. You've been warned. Welcome to Influencers Radio with your host, Jack Mize.
And welcome back to another episode of Influencers Radio. Today this is going to be probably a controversial topic. It's certainly a touchy topic that is getting a lot of media attention these days, but it's an important topic for certainly the people involved, and that is really the public safety service men and women, first responders, police, firefighters, paramedics, and dispatchers. These folks have some of the toughest jobs out there, and they have to make split-second decisions that impact not only the community that they're committed to protect, but the lives of the people involved in what is sometimes very volatile situations, as well as their own families. Well, as we have seen a lot lately, especially, sometimes the results of those decisions can cast them as heroes, but sometimes they find themselves vilified, especially in the court of public opinion. And when that happens, they need and deserve to be represented and defended just like anyone else. Well, today, my guest is Muna Busailah. She is the managing partner of Stone Busailah Law Firm of Pasadena, California, where she is a police, law, and litigation specialist representing federal, state, and local officers and agents in civil, criminal, administrative, and appellate matters in state and federal courts. With that, Muna, welcome to Influencers Radio.
Thank you very much. I appreciate my opportunity to be on the show.
Well, I thank you for coming on here because, it seems like this is just a really tinderbox topic. And I think it's important that we really kick this off by recognizing the hypersensitivity and political pressures and a lot of the blanket assumptions that are made right now when it comes to especially police officers being involved in situations where they are required, and they have made those split-second decisions that may not be sometimes the right decision. But even so, they deserve to be defended just like anyone else. So what inspired you to get into this and represent law enforcement?
Well, the inspiration for me to represent law enforcement stems back to 1993. In that year, there was the federal criminal trial in Los Angeles for the Rodney King officers. I was in law school in my last year and assigned to a courthouse to do an externship in bankruptcy. And I would complete my assignments as quickly as possible because the trial of the century was being conducted in the building I was working. So I'd sneak down and watch the trial. I watched the whole thing, and it followed from watching parts of it during the Simi Valley trial in 92. And then my law school was in the area that was part of the riots following the acquittal of the officers in 92. So I wanted very much to see and experience firsthand what was being presented in the federal criminal trial, because I couldn't understand how we ended up with a not guilty verdict, just like I'm sure most of the rest of the United States felt, because of the way the media had presented it. And in watching the trial and watching the evidence presented, the witnesses, I was able to see firsthand that what we were being told by the media was only a fraction of what was being presented. We weren't given the whole story. It was actually, besides what the media was playing and the constant repetition of a snippet of the video, not the entirety, it was clear that we were being shown a biased presentation of what went on and not the whole case. And that realization really disturbed me and spurred me on to feel the need to represent people that are being targeted or sacrificed for political reasons. And are not being given a fair opportunity to defend themselves. And I saw that in 93 in the federal criminal trial for the officers in the Rodney King case, and have seen it since.
Well, I think, and certainly media probably plays a bigger role than it did in 93 in a lot of these situations. And you said something there about, the way that these stories are represented. And I think it's fair to say, and I don't think a lot of people would have an argument that media, regardless of which side they're trying to frame the story of, there's very little, if any, unbiased representations of these stories. And that creates that public perception and creates some very strong emotional thoughts and feelings around this. Now, how much of that public perception actually influences the investigations? Is it something that these investigations ignore completely, or does it have an impact on some of the decisions that are made?
I think it has an impact. I don't know that anyone would say that directly, but I think it impacts it. It can't be avoided. I mean, if there's an incident that is captured by the media and it's put out on all of the stations and it's replayed repeatedly, it has to have an impact, because the officers that are conducting the investigation are also watching the same channels. They're watching the same presentation of media. And the employer, if weighing against their own welfare or the officers and the need to do what's right quickly before they even have all of the information or the evidence, may sacrifice the individual just to push away from them, to wash their hands of them and say, I took care of quickly what I needed to without even knowing all of the facts. Now, whether those same political individuals will come back later and say that we can't, I'm sorry, I should have looked through everything. That has happened a few times, but for the most part, no. I think the political pressure that is put upon the entity and the investigators for things that are pushed out of the media, I think does exist and can and does have an impact on the investigations.
Well, I think, what's interesting to me, and as I've followed you and really see deeper into what you're doing, I realize, there's a stigma around engaging an attorney for some reason, especially when these things are played on the media, that people seem to be quick to say, well, if you didn't do anything wrong, why are you so quick to engage an attorney? Do you see this, even though law enforcement officers are around this and they probably see this happening all the time? Do you see that when they're put in that position that they also kind of, well, wait, I didn't do anything. I'll just work this out with my superiors or my employers, and then they'll see that I didn't do anything wrong, so I don't necessarily need to engage an attorney. Do you find that happens?
Yes. Unfortunately, that, especially with younger officers, we frequently see that because they're in a paramilitary organization that generally is set up to follow the rules of a superior officer. If somebody says, come in and talk to me, I have some questions for you, they don't necessarily take the minute to pause and say, well, wait a minute, could this result in harm to my employment? I need to call my representative or my lawyer. They will just frequently go in and just participate willingly, voluntarily. And they come from the perspective of, I didn't do anything wrong. I have nothing to hide. And with those two contexts, I'm sure I can handle it myself and just tell them what they need to know, and they'll believe me because they're my employer and we're all part of one family. Where we're important is to be able to navigate that process with the officer so that they understand what's going to be asked of them, how their answers can inadvertently cause more damaging consequences than if they were properly prepared, if they had all the information to answer the questions correctly, and they were able to provide the employer the information they need and still have their rights protected. We're part of that critical stage of the investigation, and it's important to have us there to help guide the officers through the investigative process. Whether it's administrative or it's criminal, it's critical to have your lawyer with you. Not because you've done something wrong or you have anything to hide, but because we're there to protect your interests and make sure it's a fair investigation.
Well, one thing that really stands out to me about, what you do in your firm is, well, first of all, it's hard for me to make judgment on Indians because, I've never walked in an officer's shoes. I've never probably made a decision that comes close to being as, the impact that they can have in just a matter of moments that they have to make that decision on, protecting a community. But there are people in your firm that are former law enforcement, former, first responders. Do you find that makes a big difference in being able to, and I don't even want to use the word empathize because but really being able to understand their situation and have a better, kind of, I guess, for lack of a better term, look inside the mind of a law enforcement officer that's in that situation?
Absolutely. I think it helps immensely because the attorneys in our firm have either retired from the ranks of sergeant up to chief of police that are members of our firm, including fire personnel that retired as fire chiefs. So with that perspective, they're able to assist the lawyers who have not had that law enforcement experience, but more importantly, to connect and relate immediately to the client because they've been there. They've been involved in uses of force. They've been involved in shootings. They've been involved in investigations. They've had allegations brought against them, or they've been sued and ended up as defendants in court. They understand the ramifications of how allegations and investigations can flow and damage their careers. And I think it helps give the client more confidence and assurance that they're going to be taken care of because they're being represented by people who understand what they're going through and are focused on making sure that the end result is to protect their careers so they have a future to continue or keep them out of criminal prosecutions.
And even beyond that, the criminal prosecutions, it seems to me that even if they're found to be, in the right for the decisions they made, or they're found to have acted correctly or within, guidelines, there still can be a big impact, like you said, on their career, right? On their livelihoods, on, what they're able to do after that. And I guess also on the civil side of that. Can you talk a little bit about that it doesn't necessarily seem to end with, okay, you're cleared of this incident. It seems like that's just part one.
It very well can be, yes, because several of our cases would go from the stage of something is seen on the television and it's going to turn into a potential criminal investigation, maybe by the state investigators or the federal investigators. At the same time, the employer is investigating them administratively for policy violations. And at the same time, say if it was a use of force or a Fourth Amendment seizure or something of that nature, there will be a lawsuit that also is to address the civil rights violations that are alleged to have occurred. So even if the department in its investigation finds that you did not commit a policy violation, that doesn't mean that the officer isn't going to be prosecuted or isn't going to be sued. Or even if all three occur and he's found to have been in the right, he's still been in a situation where he has suffered one or up to all three of those processes and is going to have a very difficult time coming back from that. It will be the feelings of isolation, betrayal by the employer, not supported maybe by their family in uniform, maybe having difficulties at home. There's a lot of consequences that come from having an allegation brought forth, either based on an incident that's televised or one that comes internally, and the consequences that flow thereafter. You don't just come back from it, well, I got stamped not guilty and everything's good. You've been damaged as a result of having gone through that process, and we're there to help them through those processes so that they feel like they're whole, or at least as much whole as we can put them back together at the end of one or all three of those areas, administrative, civil, or criminal.
Yeah, it seems like when something like this happens, it's tough to put it back together like new, right? Like it was before. And, a lot of people that find themselves, it seems, in need of an attorney, it seems to be at a point where it's urgent, right? That they need to talk to an attorney, or it's something that completely unexpected. But I imagine with especially the people that you represent and that you help and defend, there's probably, especially more and more, becoming a sense that, there's a potential that I may need something like this, probably more so than people in a lot of other professions, that I may need to have someone on my side, or at least potentially think about that. At what point would you say in a police officer's career, or, their scope of duties, do you think that they should at least look into or talk with someone like you or your firm? Is it something that they don't need to think about until they're actually put in that situation, or is it something that they should do as a precursor or a preventative measure, just in case something happens?
Well, frequently we're not called in until there's an emergency, you're right, or they've been noticed that they are under investigation. Having us top of mind as a group that you can call to get representation and know that you're being protected is good. It's a good thing to have available to you. But for the most part, we are contacted when somebody is notified that they're under investigation, or they've been arrested, or they see it on the weekly news that there's something going on television and it involves something that they've been involved in. Then they are immediately calling us and saying, okay, help me. I don't know how to manage this situation. I need somebody beside me to make sure that you can act as my voice and guide me through this situation.
So, but it definitely sounds like it's something that at least someone in that in this chosen profession should have on the top of their mind, that know that something like this is available, and to understand that they should probably be prepared if something comes up, correct?
Absolutely, yes.
Well, I think I want to understand. I mean, obviously, the criminal accusations have been put in a spotlight lately, but you also represent people in what's called administrative actions, right? And there's other things outside of just this one incident where maybe, someone was hurt, or, even their life was lost, because of an altercation. But there's other things, probably a wide range of things that they may need to engage someone like you. Can you talk about some of those other areas and kind of define what are situations that fall under like administrative actions, which I would imagine may be more common than what we see, in the media?
Yes, of course. Yeah. The criminal incidents are outnumbered significantly by administrative investigations. And an administrative investigation could be involving a policy violation, or if it goes to the criminal side, it could be involving an accusation of something that was criminal conduct. But for the most part, they're policy or procedure violations that are alleged, and the individual is being investigated to determine if they violated the policies. So say it could be a social media policy. Maybe they posted on their platforms information or their opinion about something that was going on, and the employer doesn't find it appropriate that they express themselves in that manner on a social media platform. Or they erred in completing a report on time or failed some other training aspect. There's a variety of different areas that they could be investigated for. It could be a discourteous comment. It could be neglecting of a duty, anything of that nature. It's wide ranging. Anything that could be part of their employment or have a nexus to their employment could be subject to an administrative investigation, for which they would need representation to help guide them through the process and protect their rights.
Yeah, and I think a lot of people don't think about that. And even though, social media and things like that are, it's something that's relatively new, and probably 10, 15 years ago, wasn't even a threat or something that was on people's minds as a potential to have a negative impact on their career. Can you give some examples of how delicate, or how much of a tightrope that they're having to cross when it comes to, mixing their opinions as law enforcement on social media versus, staying within the guidelines that'll keep them out of trouble?
Yes, this is a complicated subject, but like everyone else has a First Amendment right to free speech. Law enforcement officers do as well. However, they do not have a right to maintain their employment as a result of First Amendment speech that crosses the line. So they need to be mindful of what they're posting while on social media platforms, because while they think they may be just posting their opinion may reflect or create a nexus back to their employment if it's known that they are law enforcement officers. There may be a blending of whether they're speaking as in their individual capacity or as a member of a department, and whether they're referring to certain ethnicities or social issues or political issues can turn this matter of what they think is just free speech into an administrative investigation and cause them to be terminated from employment.
But I guess a lot of people don't think about that. You see people in every walk of life, in every profession, finding themselves getting caught up in controversy by making those their opinions public. And you said something that I hadn't really thought about is people often use that. Well, it's free speech. I have a right to free speech. But just like you said, that a lot of people forget these days is that kind of speech has consequences. How delicate or how difficult is that to balance when representing someone in that aspect? Is there a clear delineation, a line that gets crossed, or is that just subjective to the situation?
There's frequently a nuance in the postings that can be made on social media, because they could be, nobody can read tone into a written posting, and it could be that the employer finds it causing them to have disrespect or disregard in the community that's served, but maybe the individual didn't mean it that way. But the physical reading of the words could be different from the import that was meant. So it's very delicate and it's very nuanced on how to balance between the two and try to articulate what the officer meant when he made the posting. Was it just a venting? Was it an expression of frustration of what was happening in the world? Was it something that they actually believed? It's very difficult to gauge that against the public perception of what that post actually said when it's played out in the media, or if the employer just gets it and says, I do not want my members to say things of this nature.
Now, these things typically spelled out ahead of time. This is what we expect, and this is what you should expect if you do this. Are they being educated on these guidelines? Because it seems like the goalpost, if you will, moves quite a bit over time. That what's acceptable and is acceptable seems to change frequently. Is there education, or is it something that you can provide to agencies or something like that to help educate them on to prevent them from crossing the lines so that maybe they don't find themselves in that situation?
Sure. We provide training to associations or to the departments themselves on various aspects of legal issues that could affect their continued employment. Social media postings as an example. We also put out training bulletins and other newsworthy posts so that our communities can understand what may be affecting their continued employment and how to try and stay within the guidelines of policies that are out there. Each agency will have different policies. It's not one standard across all of California. So each agency's policies need to be reviewed carefully and make sure that you're operating within them. And they're not necessarily written specific so that it's implicitly clear to the officer what can and can't be spoken or put out in a social media context. So it leaves the employer some room to interpret, and that, of course, leaves the officer maybe with a little bit of confusion as to what he would have known as being a violation of policy if he was intended to post something. Makes it a little bit more gray.
Well, yeah. One thing when it comes, especially to the law, when people are accused, it's a heightened emotional event, right?
Correct.
And so outside of just the legal aspects or the professional aspects, I'm often intrigued and would like to ask, if you don't mind, and how you're able to, separate the heightened emotional aspects of the people that are involved to, to the facts. Because the one thing that it's just incredible to me is how attorneys are able to kind of cut through that, or at least not be, impacted by it as much. Is it something that's just born in you?
I think the biggest way to present these types of cases is to demonstrate the law, what the training was of this officer, maybe some of the human factor elements on how the body would respond to incidents and events. And most clearly is to put the decision maker or the jury or whoever's looking at this case in the shoes of the officer who was obliged to make split-second decisions. So, for example, if it's a use of force case, they're going to be judged under the Fourth Amendment as to whether their actions were objectively reasonable in light of the facts and circumstances they were confronting them in that instant. So the only way it may look bad on a video or on a body camera, but the only way for the decision maker to determine whether there's a violation of law or a violation of policy is to have them experience what the officer experienced and be in the officer's shoes as that decision, right before the decision was made and as that decision was being made, so that they have the full understanding of what was experienced before the officer acted.
Muna, you've been doing this for nearly 30 years, I guess, and you've probably seen it evolve. Do you find that today that you spend more time or more time than in the past defending not just your clients within the realm of the letter of the law, but also defending them against that bias or that public perception as well? Because it seems like that's becoming more and more necessary to this, especially when it comes to, like you talked about, how it impacts their careers and their livelihoods beyond the actual legal decision. Do you see that has grown, and do you see it as becoming even more and more prominent in the future?
Yes, I think that we have to spend more time educating the public, the community's understanding of what the officers go through and what they're doing, so that there's an appreciation for it and they can embrace the actions that are being taken by law enforcement. If they don't understand what they're doing and they don't understand how they're doing it or why they're doing it, then they will just take whatever they see on the media or take what they're told at face value and say, well, clearly it looks wrong, therefore I'm not going to look any further or explore any further what other factors may have played in this one instance. So yeah, we do spend a considerable amount of time on the education part of it. For example, policymakers should go through FAT simulators and things of that sort to help them have a virtual experience of what an officer may experience in a split second, and get them to understand that these complex decisions that they must go through in such a short amount of time can't be viewed from the lens of hindsight. And a lot of the things that they're seeing on the video cameras or on the body cameras or on the television reporter cameras are not from the angle of the officer at the time that they're experiencing it. And that needs to be understood and explained, so that while you may see it from the camera's perspective, that's not the position that the officer was in when he saw whatever he saw that caused him to do what he did. So yes, we have to approach it from both angles.
Well, I think you just really made that as clear as possible, and realizing that there are a lot of, I guess, the equivalent of Monday morning quarterbacks when it comes to, oh, well, they should have done this or they shouldn't have done this, or on both sides of it. And I think it's clear, like we talked about earlier, that hypersensitivity and the public pressure, and obviously the media creates these blanket assumptions. And I think it's fair to say, and I think probably you would agree, and that all incidents officers didn't necessarily make the right decision, whereas clearly and certainly all incidents aren't the officers always being bad actors, and making wrong decisions. And it seems like there's more and more a all or nothing kind of a view being pushed, it seems, by the media, when that certainly there's no way that could be the case. So, I certainly want to commend you for being a person that protects, those that by and large protect the rest of us. Like I said before, I've never walked in their shoes, but your folks certainly have. And I think that makes a big difference in, how you come to represent these folks. So I want to thank you for coming on and talking about this today. How can people find out more about Muna Busailah and the Stone Busailah law firm and how to, engage you if necessary, but even just to learn more about what the options are if something like this comes up?
Well, thank you so much, Jack. We are proud, honestly and truly proud, to be able to represent the brave men and women who have joined this noble profession and daily put their lives in danger for those of perfect strangers. And should anyone out there want to reach out and set up a consultation for free to talk to us about an incident they have or a concern, or to retain us, they're welcome to contact us at our website at stonebusailah.com. And on Instagram, it's stone_Busailah. And you're welcome to reach out at any time. We're happy to be of service. And thank you so much for having me on the program.
Oh, well, this has been my pleasure, and we'll definitely put those links on the show post. Folks, there you have it. Until next time on Influencers Radio, remember, you are the only real game changer.
You've been listening to Influencers Radio. To get all past shows and updates on future shows, visit influencersradio.com today.